Imagine stepping into the Golden Elm, Portland's crown jewel of dining, where crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over polished marble floors, and the soft clink of wine glasses blends seamlessly with the delicate notes of a pianist tucked in the corner, crafting an atmosphere of elegance and anticipation. This isn't just a restaurant, it's a stage for life's grandest moments, where six-figure deals are sealed over perfectly seared steaks, anniversaries are toasted with vintage champagne, and milestone birthdays are celebrated with decadent desserts. But on this quiet evening, something unexpected unfolds. A moment so subtle yet so powerful that it stops the room cold, gripping every heart in its wake. And if you've ever felt the sting of being overlooked or dismissed, this story will hit home. So hit that like button right now. Because you're watching the Jones Life Stories, where we uncover the moments that shape us, challenge us, and remind us to stand tall. And before we dive in, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? What city or country? We love connecting with our global family and hearing your stories. So let's begin this tale of silent injustice, quiet strength, and a reckoning that changed everything. The late afternoon sun slanted through the towering, spotless windows of the Golden Elm, bathing the dining room in a soft amber hue that reflected off the gleaming surfaces of polished oak tables and intricately designed silverware. The restaurant was more than a place to eat. It was a sanctuary of luxury, a destination where Portland's elite gathered to mark their triumphs and celebrate their joys. The air buzzed with a carefully curated excitement, the kind of knowing you're in a space where power and prestige converge. Conversations were hushed but deliberate, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or the clink of a glass raised in a toast. The pianist, a young woman with deft fingers, played a gentle melody that wove through the room, tying together the murmurs of conversation and the subtle clatter of cutlery. Every detail, from the handcrafted light fixtures to the meticulously folded linen napkins, spoke of refinement, of a place where every moment was intentional, every gesture significant. But then, the heavy glass doors at the entrance swung open, and the rhythm of the room shifted. In stepped an elderly black woman, moving slowly but with a quiet determination that seemed to command the space around her. Her indigo coat, finely stitched along the cuffs, draped elegantly over her shoulders, catching the light in a way that made it clear this was no ordinary garment. Her posture was upright, proud. Her small leather purse clutched tightly in her hands, and her face, though calm, carried a quiet dignity that drew a few curious glances from the patrons nearby. This was Miss Delaney, a woman whose presence seemed to carry a story untold, a weight of experience that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. She moved with the grace of someone who had lived through decades of challenges and triumphs, her steps measured but unwavering, her eyes scanning the room with a quiet assurance that belied her unassuming appearance. The hostess, a young woman in her early 20s named Emily, stood behind the podium, her posture stiffening slightly as Miss Delaney approached. Her smile was polite but tight, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes, betraying a subtle unease. "Do you have a reservation, ma'am?" she asked, her tone clipped, her eyes darting briefly to the empty entrance as if expecting someone else to walk in, someone who might fit the room's unspoken expectations more neatly. "Yes, under Miss Delaney," the woman replied, her voice soft but steady, carrying a warmth that seemed to soften the edges of the hostess's demeanour, if only for a moment. Emily scanned her reservation list, her fingers moving quickly over the tablet, and gave a curt nod. "Right this way," she said, gesturing toward a small table tucked away near the swinging doors to the kitchen, a far cry from the prime seats in the centre of the dining room, where the light was softer, the view unobstructed, and the service noticeably swifter. Miss Delaney didn't protest. She followed the hostess with the same composed grace, settling into her chair with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her purse placed carefully beside her. She opened the menu, her eyes scanning the elegant script, but almost immediately something felt off. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Servers bustled around the dining room, their movements swift and practiced, balancing trays of steaming entrees and refilling glasses with sparkling water or ruby red wine. Plates clattered softly, conversations ebbed and flowed, and yet no one approached Miss Delaney's table. The waiter assigned to her section, a tall man in his late 20s named Brian, moved with a confident stride, his crisp white shirt and black vest immaculate, his smile reserved for the tables of younger, casually dressed patrons who laughed easily and tipped generously. He passed by Miss Delaney's table multiple times, his eyes sliding past her as if she were invisible, his attention focused on a group of young professionals celebrating a promotion or a couple marking their engagement with a bottle of champagne. When he finally approached, nearly 10 minutes after she'd been seated, his tone was brisk, almost dismissive. "Sorry about the wait. We're kind of slammed right now," he said, barely pausing as he adjusted the tray in his hands. "I'll be back in a bit to take your order." Miss Delaney nodded politely, her voice warm despite his coldness. "Thank you," she said, her expression giving nothing away, though the faintest tightening of her lips hinted at an awareness of the slight. The room was starting to notice. Whispers floated from nearby tables, soft but pointed. A woman in a sleek red dress leaned toward her dinner companion, a man in a tailored suit, murmuring something under her breath while stealing glances at Miss Delaney. Her words were inaudible, but the tilt of her head and the quick flick of her eyes spoke volumes. At another table, a man in his 40s squinted, his brow furrowing as if trying to place why Miss Delaney seemed out of place, why her presence didn't align with the room's polished rhythm. The contrast was stark. The younger patrons, dressed in designer casual or business attire, were served promptly, their glasses refilled before they were half empty, their servers lingering to chat about the day's specials or recommend a dessert pairing. Meanwhile, Miss Delaney sat alone, her water glass untouched, her menu still open, her presence seemingly erased from the room's choreography. The pianist's melody seemed to falter for a moment, as if even she sensed the shift in the air, the subtle injustice unfolding in plain sight. Have you ever felt the weight of a room change, as if the air itself grows heavy with unspoken truths? That's what was happening at the Golden Elm. A silent injustice was taking root, its roots spreading through every glance, every whisper, every moment of neglect. It wasn't loud, it wasn't overt, but it was unmistakable, and it was louder than any shout. If you believe everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or how they appear, hit that like button right now, because this is the Jones Life Stories, where we shine a light on the moments that demand our attention, that call us to be better, to do better. And if stories like this resonate with you, if they stir something in your heart, subscribe to the Jones Life Stories. We're here to share tales that spark change, that remind us of the power of dignity and the courage it takes to stand up. Drop a comment below. Where are you tuning in from? We want to hear from you, our global family, as we dive deeper into this story. Brian returned to Miss Delaney's table after another long stretch, his attitude no warmer than before. "Sorry, we're understaffed tonight," he said, his eyes avoiding hers, his tone flat as if reciting a script he'd used too many times. "It might be a while." Miss Delaney's response was as gentle as ever, a "take your time." But the energy around her had shifted noticeably. Patrons were no longer just glancing, they were watching. A young couple at the centre of the room, their table adorned with a flickering candle and a bottle of Pinot Noir, exchanged uneasy looks. "Missy looks. Oh, why hasn't that lady been served yet?" the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the pianist's soft chords, her brow creased with concern. Her partner, a man in a navy blazer, gave a slight shrug, his eyes flicking toward Brian as he strolled past Miss Delaney's table yet again, his expression unreadable, his stride unbothered. The woman's question hung in the air, unanswered but heavy, a quiet challenge to the room's polished facade. Miss Delaney remained composed, her posture straight, her hands resting softly on the linen-covered table. She'd faced this kind of subtle dismissal before, the kind that wasn't loud enough to call out, but sharp enough to cut deep in its quiet neglect. She'd lived through decades of moments like this, moments where her presence was questioned, her worth underestimated, her dignity tested. But she didn't waver. She wasn't here to make a scene or demand attention. She was here to dine, to exist, to claim her space in a world that too often tried to push her to the margins. Her calm was her strength, her silence a testament to a resilience forged over a lifetime. She glanced at her wristwatch, a delicate silver piece that glinted faintly in the chandelier's light, and adjusted her coat, her movements precise and unhurried. She was waiting, but not just for service. She was waiting for the world to catch up to her. Unbeknownst to Brian, to the hostess, to the whispering patrons, someone else was watching, and his gaze carried a weight that could shift the very foundation of the Golden Elm. Near the bar, seated alone with a glass of sparkling water, was a man in a tailored steel-grey blazer, his sharp eyes tracking every move in the room. His name was Marcus Sinclair, and he wasn't just any guest. He was the owner of the Golden Elm. And Miss Delaney, she was his mother. Marcus had built this restaurant from nothing, pouring his heart, his savings, and his dreams into every inch of its design. The handcrafted light fixtures, the seasonal menu inspired by his mother's home cooking, the ethos of excellence that permeated the space, all of it was a tribute to her, to the values she'd instilled in him. Respect, hard work, dignity. She was his rock, the woman who had held his hand through childhood, guided him through the struggles of young adulthood, and stood by him as he navigated the cutthroat world of fine dining. Every late night spent balancing the books, every moment of doubt when the restaurant teetered on the edge of failure, she was there, her voice steady, her belief unwavering. And now, here she sat in his restaurant being treated like she didn't belong. Marcus's jaw clenched, his fingers tapping a slow, deliberate rhythm against the polished wood of the bar. He wasn't impulsive. Years of managing high-end establishments had taught him the power of patience, of watching, of letting people reveal themselves. But this was different. This was personal. His mother, the woman who had sacrificed so much, who had taught him everything he knew about integrity, was being dismissed in the very space he'd built to honour her. He watched as Brian laughed with a group of young professionals at a nearby table, pouring wine with a flourish, cracking jokes that drew easy laughter. He caught the faint smirk Brian shared with another server, a young woman named Sarah, as they passed Miss Delaney's table, as if they were in on some private joke. Some shared assumption about the woman sitting alone. The fire in Marcus's chest grew, a slow burn that threatened to erupt. But he held it in check, his eyes narrowing as he measured every interaction, every slight, every moment of neglect. Marcus could have stepped in right then, could have called Brian over and ended the charade with a single word. But he chose to wait. He wanted to see how far this would go, how his staff would treat someone they assumed had no influence, no power, no voice. He wanted to know if the values he'd built the Golden Elm on were truly alive in its walls, or if they were just words on a mission statement, forgotten in the hustle of a busy night. He beckoned his floor manager, Caroline, a composed woman in her 50s with a sharp eye and a calm demeanour. Keep an eye on table 9, he said under his breath, nodding subtly toward his mother's table. Don't step in yet. Caroline hesitated, her eyes flickering with concern, but she nodded, sensing the seriousness behind his calm tone. She knew Marcus well enough to recognize that when his voice took on that edge of firmness, there was no room for debate. The discomfort in the room thickened, a tangible weight that pressed against the polished surfaces and muted the usual hum of conversation. Diners were no longer just glancing. They were staring, their eyes darting between Miss Delaney's table and Brian's careless movements. Conversations grew quieter, the clink of glasses and plates softer, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The young couple at the centre of the dining room leaned closer, their earlier unease now a quiet indignation. Why hasn't that lady even gotten water? The woman whispered, her voice low but sharp, her eyes narrowing as Brian passed by Miss Delaney's table yet again, his tray balanced with entrees for another group. Her partner, his jaw tight, gave a slow nod, his gaze lingering on Miss Delaney, who sat with the same unyielding composure, her hands folded, her menu still open, her water glass still empty. Miss Delaney's calm was a force of its own, a quiet defiance that seemed to ripple through the room. She'd lived through too many moments like this to be shaken, too many instances of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. But she didn't need to raise her voice or demand attention. Her presence was enough, her dignity a silent rebuke to the neglect around her. She reached for her water glass, only to find it empty, untouched since she'd sat down. Across the room, a waiter poured a fresh glass of white wine for a man who'd only just arrived, his smile wide, his service prompt. The contrast was jarring, a stark reminder of the unspoken hierarchies that still lingered in spaces like this, even in a city as progressive as Portland. And then Brian reappeared, balancing a tray of entrees meant for another table. He slowed near Miss Delaney's table, not to check on her, but to offer a passing remark that landed like a slap. "Is still not ready to order?" he asked, his tone dry, bordering on condescending, as if the delay was somehow her fault. Miss Delaney looked up slowly, her eyes warm but carrying a quiet weight, an unflinching calm that made Brian hesitate for just a second. "I've been ready," she said evenly, her voice soft but firm. "Whenever you have a moment." Brian gave a short nod, mumbling something she didn't catch, already turning away. But that moment, that fleeting exchange, was the spark that ignited the storm. Marcus had seen enough. He stood, his movements slow but deliberate, his presence commanding without a single word. The room seemed to pause, the soft clink of dishes fading, the pianist's fingers hovering above the key. Heads turned as Marcus crossed the dining room, his tailored blazer catching the light, his steps measured but purposeful. He reached Brian just as the waiter was cracking a joke at another table, his laughter loud and careless. The smirk on Brian's face vanished the moment he saw Marcus standing behind him, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp with intent. "And Marcus, hey," Brian stammered, forcing a weak smile. "I didn't know you were here tonight." "I've been here," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that cut through the room. "And I've been watching you ignore my mother. She's been sitting there for nearly half an hour without even a glass of water." Brian went pale, his eyes darting to Miss Delaney, who sat upright, her gaze steady and unflinching. "Your mother," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper, his confidence crumbling under the weight of Marcus's words. "Yes," Marcus said, his tone like steel, unyielding and cold. "The woman you treated like she didn't matter, like she wasn't worth your time, while you catered to everyone else in this room like royalty." The dining room fell silent, a hush so complete that even the pianist froze, her hands suspended above the keys. Every head turned, every eye locked on the scene unfolding at the center of the room. Brian's mouth opened, searching for words, for an excuse, for anything to fill the void, but Marcus didn't give him the chance. "Don't bother," he said sharply. "Everyone here saw it. There's no excuse." He turned to Caroline, who had been standing just off to the side, her face a mix of concern and uncertainty. "Caroline," he said, his voice steady but firm, "take over table 9. Make sure my mother has everything she needs. Right now." Caroline nodded quickly, moving to Miss Delaney's table with a rush of apologies, pouring water and offering a fresh menu with a sincerity that spoke of her own discomfort with what had transpired. Marcus turned back to Brian, his expression unreadable but his eyes burning with restrained anger. "We'll talk about your future here later," he said flatly. "For tonight, you're done. Go home." Brian stood frozen, the colour drained from his face, humiliation and shame warring in his expression. Wordlessly, he untied his apron, set it on a nearby table, and walked out, the heavy glass doors swinging shut behind him with a thud that echoed in the silence. The room stayed still for a moment, the weight of what had just happened settling over every table, every patron, every staff member. Marcus made his way to his mother's table, his stern demeanour softening as he crouched beside her, his eyes meeting hers. "You okay, Mum?" he asked quietly, his voice thick with concern. Miss Delaney smiled, a small but radiant gesture, and reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm all right, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady and warm. "You handled that with grace." Marcus exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing, though a flicker of regret lingered in his eyes. "I should have stepped in sooner," he murmured, his voice barely audible. But Miss Delaney shook her head, her expression firm. "No," she said, "you let him show his true colours. That's more powerful than calling it out too early." The restaurant slowly found its rhythm again, but the tone had changed. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter, more introspective, as if the room itself was reflecting on what it had witnessed. Guests cast respectful glances toward Miss Delaney, some nodding subtly in her direction. others avoiding her gaze with a newfound awareness, their expressions a mix of admiration and discomfort. Caroline personally oversaw every detail of Miss Delaney's meal, ensuring each dish was presented with care, each gesture accompanied by heartfelt apologies, not out of formality, but as an attempt to mend a wrong on behalf of the entire establishment. Miss Delaney received it all with her signature grace, her silence speaking louder than any words, her presence a reminder that dignity doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. At a nearby table, the young couple from earlier leaned closer, their voices low but urgent. "I can't believe he treated her that way," the woman whispered, shaking her head, her eyes still fixed on Miss Delaney. "It really makes you think, how many times does this happen, and no one does anything?" Her partner gave a slow nod, his expression thoughtful. "It's not just about noticing," he said. "It's about whether you do something about it when you do." Marcus overheard their words as he walked past, and they stuck with him, a quiet reminder of the moments, too many to count, when people like Brian had gotten away with quiet mistreatment simply because no one had been paying attention, or worse, because no one had cared enough to speak up. As Miss Delaney finished her meal, Marcus sat with her again, his presence a quiet anchor in the now subdued dining room. She reached for his hand, her voice soft but full of meaning. "You've built something special here, Marcus," she said, her eyes warm with pride. "But remember, it's not just about the food or the look of the place. It's about how people feel when they walk through your doors." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "I know," he said quietly, regret flickering across his face. "I let you down tonight," but Miss Delaney shook her head firmly. "No," she said. "You gave people the chance to see the truth, and you stood up with integrity. That's what matters." The staff moved with more intention now, their service not just quicker, but more considerate, as if the lesson of the evening had settled into their bones. Respect wasn't optional, kindness wasn't a suggestion. These were the pillars on which the Golden Elm stood, and Marcus realized that leadership wasn't just about running a business. It was about defending the values that shaped it, values that came from the woman sitting across from him, the woman who had taught him everything he knew about strength. Grace and standing tall in the face of adversity. As the evening wound down, Miss Delaney began gathering her things, her posture still elegant, her expression calm. She had walked into the Golden Elm with dignity, and she was leaving with something even more powerful. Proof that quiet strength could change a room, could shift the hearts and minds of those who witnessed it. The patrons who had watched the confrontation now carried a different energy, their glances toward her filled with respect, with recognition, with a quiet acknowledgement of the lesson they'd all been taught. The Golden Elm didn't sound quite the same as it had an hour earlier. The energy had shifted, the atmosphere now tinged with introspection, with a newfound awareness of the power of a single moment. And now, we turn to you, our Jones Life Stories family. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have spoken up, stepped in, or let the moment slide? These moments aren't always loud, they don't always come with fireworks or fanfare. But they're all around us, in restaurants, boardrooms, grocery stores, and everyday interactions. They're the moments that test us, that ask us who we are and what we stand for. Let this story be a reminder. When the moment comes, choose empathy. Choose dignity. Choose to be the voice that says, "This isn't right." If this story moved you, if it stirred something in your heart, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the Jones Life Stories. We're here to share tales that inspire, that challenge, that remind us to stand taller together. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We can't wait to hear from you, to connect with our global community, to keep these stories alive. At the Jones Life Stories, we believe every moment is a chance to grow, to reflect, to make a difference. Miss Delaney's story isn't just about one evening in a restaurant. It's about the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard. It's about the courage it takes to notice, to act, to be the change. So go out there and be the voice. Be the one who sees the overlooked, who lifts up the dismissed, who makes every room a place where dignity shines. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Jones Life Stories, because together, through stories like these, we can build a world where respect is the rule, not the exception. Let's make it happen, one story at a time.